Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Mike Smith, and I'm the Director of International Trade at the World Trade Center Los Angeles, an organization affiliated with the LAEDC, much like the CCW. Now, as I was thinking about it, I think that makes us either siblings or first cousins. Not really sure, but definitely all family. Us at the World Trade Center LA, we focus on attracting international companies to expand to LA, as well as promote new market opportunities for local companies. I know all the organizations involved in this program are grateful you've carved out an hour of your day for the Center of Competitive Workforce's much anticipated release of its newest report on global commerce and identifying growth for middle-skilled jobs. There's a lot to discuss from the report and its implications, which is why we have the report's authors and experts in economic and workforce development here to help us understand its findings and animate the project's recommendations. In just a moment, we'll have Mr. Aveen Sharma, who's the Director of Labor Relations and Workforce Development at the Port of LA, join us to share his observations on the needs and trends of the port industry, which will then be followed by a presentation of the report. But as I was combing through the attendee list, I couldn't help but notice the diverse sectors and organizations represented, from businesses, government, educators, of course. And as someone who spent about 6 years in this field, it's exciting to see how much interest the industry is receiving. And for good reason. We know international trade is the lifeblood for the Southern California economy. The transformation the region has seen from its initial trade activity, which was dominated by fish canneries and pet food manufacturing up to the 1970s, to now a major artery for the US economy that touches virtually every corner of the state, is nothing short of amazing. And we can't forget about airports, which in LA County account for about 1% of our trade volume, but 10% of its value. As this industry has grown over the last decades, so too have the jobs. But the last 3 years have seen large oscillating changes in global commerce and policy approaches. Whether it was the most recent US administration that employed a more bilateral approach when engaging trading partners that included some protectionist policies, or the ratification of the new US-Mexico-Canada agreement that included labor and environmental provisions for the first time in any US. And of course, the elephant in the room, the COVID-19 pandemic that shut down production across the globe and created enormous ripples in the supply chain. These events, among others, have fundamentally changed the way we approach global commerce. Recently, new developments in global trade leadership include the first woman and first African to be appointed the Director General of the World Trade Organization. Additionally, should President Biden's nominee for the United States Trade Representative, Katherine Tai, be confirmed, she would not only be the first woman of color to hold the position, but also the USA's first chief trade negotiator fluent in Mandarin. A recommitment to multilateralism from the new administration also stokes optimism that more opportunities to increase trade to and from the region is on the horizon. Personally, I think this report is perfectly timed given some of the local effects the pandemic is having on the industry. Two of those being record monthly cargo volumes on one hand, and on the other, an aging demographic for many of the middle skill occupations laid out in this report. This environment is only accelerating these changes in both employment mix and technology adoption, which provides a timely opportunity for targeted workforce initiatives in this report. So thank you all again for being here. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Aveen.
Hi, Mike. Thanks so much for that introduction. I really appreciate that. I'm really excited to be here this afternoon. My name is Aveen Sharma. I'm the Director of Labor Relations and Workforce Development for the Port of Los Angeles. I guess I'm definitely the opening act for the report, not a sneak preview, but just really, I guess, an opening act to get the crowd warmed up. And so, as I said, I'm excited to be here because, I think this industry often gets overlooked or just misunderstood. And so it's fantastic to have a prestigious organization such as LAEDC focus on this industry by bringing in experts to provide this report that we are going to hear about shortly. And I'll obviously say at the outset, my experiences that I'll talk about this afternoon are tied to the seaports and ports and not the airport. But so happy to talk about the seaport for a couple minutes. At the port, we know how critical the goods movement sector is to our national economy. We see it now more than ever during this pandemic. While the pandemic has been devastating to many different sectors in our economy, one sector that hasn't slowed down and has actually picked up is the goods movement sector. And so as it's picked up, and I think tied to the COVID-19 pandemic and to my earlier comment about being misunderstood, I'll share an anecdote in that about a year ago when different local, state, and federal officials were putting in together stay-at-home orders and other executive orders about essential workers. My colleagues, David Libatique and Jennifer Cohen, were working closely with all these different officials just to make sure that they were correctly including the right goods movement workforce. Some of the early drafts didn't have a full enough definition of all the different critical occupations. And so, as a way of an anecdote, and to my earlier comment, I think it just shows sometimes it shows the importance of this industry, but it also shows a misunderstanding as well. And so I think that as I was asked this afternoon to provide some comments, I was really excited at this opportunity, and I was asked to provide some comments on the industry and trends that at least that I see from my perspective on the ground at the Port of Los Angeles. There's two that I'll focus on in the few minutes that I have. One is the change in technology, and the second is a bit of a more broader issue around industry culture, and especially as it relates to training. And so I'll touch on both. But as I provide answers to both of these questions on culture and also the change in technology, when I think about the port workforce, I think about two segments. There's the ILWU, International Longshore and Warehouse Union, the longshore workforce, and then there's everybody else. And so in any answer I give about the port and the workforce, I always give two separate answers because they're two very distinct parts of the workforce that have their own unique challenges, unique histories, and different equities in play for both segments. On the issue, first talking about the ILWU and the longshore workforce, on the change in technology question, yes, there's always going to be a discussion about automation, automated terminals. We have one in LA, we have one in Long Beach. There's a second one partly coming online in Los Angeles. Will there be another one in the future in the San Pedro Bay? Possibly. But as Gene Soroka, who's our executive director at the Port of Los Angeles and actually a board member on LAEDC, as he regularly says, if you look at the cargo forecast for the San Pedro Bay for the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach, there is no way the ports are going to be able to achieve that cargo forecast without an increase in the longshore workforce and the increase in individuals to operate the technologies. And so we see the change in technology conversation at the port are actually around electrification as well. It's not just an abstract notion. It's, I see many folks on this call are, very familiar are here in the region, probably very familiar with the port. You're familiar with our Clean Air Action Plan. The ports of LA and Long Beach issued a Clean Air Action Plan. Our third iteration was approved in 2017. And that Clean Air Action Plan calls for zero emission cargo handling equipment at both ports by 2030. And so it's a very real shift to zero emission, and it's also a very real date. We know that 9 years from now, that is the deadline that we have set for ourselves. And so, but it's tricky in that it's not as, I was in a conversation once where someone had said to me, well, if that's where the goal is to be 2030, and this individual was, had an academic university background and said, well, then we'll just go ahead and look to academic institutions to create training programs, and students can come in and take those programs and then operate the equipment. And what I had to share with the individual is that's not going to happen. This is a workforce that is the work that's done on the terminals and the users of this equipment. It's 100% under the exclusive jurisdiction of the International Longshore Warehouse Union, and those are the workers that will operate this equipment. So, and they have a collective bargaining agreement in place between the union and the employer on the introduction of new technologies, and then also a collective bargaining agreement provisions that speak to training and what training would look like. And so, what does that mean for us? What does that mean for us on this call? What we've looked at our role at the port is on how do we help get, and this is to the second part, the second problem identified is how do we work to change the culture? I think for many years, the discussion around training was used as almost as part of a bargaining chip in terms of the collective bargaining discussions between the union and the employer. But what we've done over the last few years is look at not making a bargaining chip, but how do we help that workforce be better trained? And so we in 2017 put together a partnership between the ILWU, the Pacific Maritime Association, and the port. And myself and my colleague Eric Martel and I worked together to put this partnership together and submit it and get certified as one of the state's first high road training partnerships. So this partnership we created was a high road training partnership that was identified by the California Workforce Development Board and EDD on a unique partnership to focus on training. And so, you know, the point there is not necessarily even the training program that we developed as part of this high road training partnership, but it's just to get that culture mindset and that shift in the longshore workforce to thinking about training, both on the union side and the employer side, where it's an inward-facing organization and an inward-facing workforce. How could we bring in experts, training experts, to help that workforce do what it needs to do and to follow along in the change in technology? And how do we support that workforce to make sure they have the right training that we need? Because with our Clean Air Action Plan to go to zero emission by 2030, I think the mistake we would make is if in 2029 we all of a sudden show up and just drop a training program onto this workforce. Instead, it's about changing the culture, working to increase this the dialogue about training, so that we can, as the technology itself gets invented and we move forward in inventing that technology and then deploying that technology, well, hopefully at the same time we can grow as well with this union and employer through our partnership that we developed to help that segment of the industry think about training. And as I said at the top, when you talk about the workforce, you got to think about the ILWU and you got to think about everybody else. So now I'll just kind of close with the everybody else. On the rest of the workforce, and that's the goods movement workforce. As I think about the port workforce, I don't just think about the 7,000 acres at the Port of LA. I think about the water all the way to the port, down the 710 corridor to the Inland Empire, to the warehousing. We're all so interconnected that I think when you think about the workforce, you've got to think about the entire region and all the different occupations there. And so, as you think about, as I said, the two issues I wanted to cover were change in technology and culture. As you think about those two questions when it comes to the rest of the workforce, it's clear the change in technology will be there too on the other occupations in terms of warehouse and logisticians and other. And as you have automated technology as well, you're going to see. I think there's been several reports done, and it's no surprise about the increase in automation in the warehousing. I think that's frankly a part of the lack of organizing on the union side, and the lack in that there's the workforce in that segment of this industry is not part of a union. And so, it's that combination as well as these companies working with very tight margins in terms of how they operate their companies. And so, last year I attended a field hearing with the California Labor Assembly Committee out in Long Beach. And, one of the points that Chair Ash Kalra brought up was that there was about 100% turnover at some of the warehouses out there in the Inland Empire. So it talks about the change in the workforce and how that's constantly doing. And, I think last year, as well as you think about the introduction of technology in this segment of the industry, the Berkeley Labor Center did a fantastic report in October 2019 talking about the future of warehouse work. And in it, they talk about how work is now being divided into its smallest units, its tasks, and the training in that way there doesn't have to be training there, and that you can just focus on the tasks and minimize training. And so that there's a challenge there. And I think another anecdote that I'll share is I had an organization reach out to me about offering truck driver training, and said they've had success in another industry training individuals, to putting them through a training program and then connecting them with an employer to go straight into it. And so, and asked if we could do the same thing in truck driving. And, what I had to point out too is that in truck driving, while there's 16,000 truck drivers that come to the Port of Los Angeles and Long Beach every single day, most of those are independent owner operators. And, as we see a change in, legislation and laws through AB5 and others, you have this workforce where it's not just large trucking companies there that are doing port drayage. And so someone can go through a training program, but then they also will have to think about how do you support that individual who's probably going to have to purchase their own truck as well. And so it's a different industry, it's a different way of thinking. And so, these challenges, as the technology is changing, and I think as these, the culture change that's going to need to happen in the rest of the workforce, and I talked about the culture change for Longshore, but the culture change in the rest of the workforce is going to be, and I think that's where all of us will come in, is that I think that these are broad systematic challenges in this other part of the workforce. And so, I've always felt that the solution here has to be a public solution. It has to be a public solution. It's, we as the public, whether we're a municipal agency as the Port Authority, I know there's many local colleges on this call today. I think we as the public are going to be responsible for trying to figure out how we can create opportunities and better train the workforce, because it's a workforce that's not just in one zip code, it's up and down, it's across the region. And so, to that end, when we at the Port think about the workforce and the needs of this workforce, we always think about it as, what can we do? Where can we be additive? How can we, as the public, it's going to be up to us to figure out how we can better train individuals to have careers in this industry. And, we look at it too, not just here at the Port, but we've had conversations with our colleagues out in the Inland Empire, whether it's the warehouse, the great work being done at the Warehouse Workers Resource Center or the Inland Empire Economic Partnership. Both those organizations have done a ton of work in that area. And so, we can't set up training programs here at the Port and expect people to arrange transportation from the Inland Empire to come all the way down here for the Port. So we need to think about it regionally, because that's where the workforce is and that's where the companies are. And so, I'll close by saying that for us here at the Port, we think about our goal, and my goal in the role that I'm in is to create an ecosystem of training and development that will sit over the industry, from the water to the warehouse, and be an ecosystem that thinks about training, thinks about innovative training, and thinks about career paths. And that's the type of industry culture change that I believe needs to happen. And, I'm really looking forward to seeing the suggestions here this afternoon and the recommendations that the report has to offer. So thank you very much, Mike, for giving me the opportunity to share some thoughts today.
Thank you so much, Aveen. And with that, I will pass it over to Richard Virchis, the Executive Director of the Center for Competitive Workforce.
Thank you, Claire, and thank you, Aveen and Mike, for your introductory comments. You, on behalf of the Center for Competitive Workforce, a regional strong workforce initiative of the 19 LA colleges in collaboration with the LA County Economic Development Corporation, it's my pleasure to welcome you all to our latest Center for Competitive Workforce report release. We've, in partnership with the LA Orange County Center of Excellence for Labor Market Research, hosted at Mount San Antonio College, and you'll hear soon from the director of the Center of Excellence, who collaborated on this report. We are pleased to convene our workforce development and education partners, and to create and manage a number of initiatives to build bridges between education and specifically community colleges and our highest growth industry and business leaders in order to strengthen curriculum, in order to increase and improve opportunities for students, to connect faculty who are on the front lines of both imparting knowledge and training, most of whom come from industry and certainly know the industries for which they're preparing students. But our ability to maintain a finger on the pulse of the economy and to connect key leaders and key partners to ensure that students of all communities have opportunities in our highest growth industries, and especially our industries where we have the geographic advantages, and the ports, both our seaports and our airports, are one of our greatest natural advantages. I was commenting earlier that the ports are perhaps even more important than Hollywood, which is what, of course, our region is well known for. The opportunities and the connection to all 88 cities in LA County and all regions of the county are equal, even if the ports and the airports are located along the coast, because we're the gateway for our national economy going east. And so our colleges from Santa Monica and El Camino and Compton on the coast, and Long Beach, of course, all the way to Mount San Antonio and Citrus on the eastern end of the county, are equally connected to our airports and our seaports, including Ontario Airport. And so we welcome you to our latest report release, and we look forward to what is another exciting report that really hopefully gives you insights into our evolving and dynamic economy, but one that has an impact on our lives and our quality of life, and one that we believe has tremendous opportunities for individuals who are entering the workforce, individuals who may be transitioning from jobs and careers that are on the decline. So we look forward to hearing more about the report. And so I'll turn it over to Arthur Girard, one of the co-authors of the report with the Institute for Applied Economics at LAEDC. Arthur.
Awesome. Thank you, Richard. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. As Richard said, my name is Arthur Girard, and I'm a research analyst with LAEDC's Institute for Applied Economics. So today I'm going to be going over some of the key findings from our report on the port-related industries in the Los Angeles basin, and then I'll turn it over to Luke Meyer and Stephen Chung for some more insight on the report. So I'd like to start off with some of the report's most important takeaways. First of all, I want to highlight the prevalence of middle-skilled jobs in the port-related industries. So these are jobs that typically require a community college level of education, which provide pathways towards even higher skilled occupations with further experience and training. Between 2019 and 2024, nearly 60% of all job openings in the port-related industries are going to be at the middle skill level, which makes them attractive targets for the region's community college graduates. Now, the second key point concerns industry growth. The port-related industries have cooled off a bit from their rapid pace of employment growth in the previous decade due to the current circumstances. We're still forecasting growth in the near future, but it is rather dampened from what it would have been in a world absent of the pandemic. Finally, it's important to note the strength of the air transportation industry in the Los Angeles basin. It's nearly doubled in employment in the past decade, and it's expected to play an important role in the future growth of the port-related industries here. So, what are the port-related transportation industries? In this report, we define them as air transportation, water transportation, and support activities for transportation, which are each made up of smaller component industries. It's important to note that marine cargo handling, logistics, and the port-related operations, those are all going to fall under the support activities for transportation banner, while the actual ship crews would be present in water transportation. So the total estimated economic impact of the San Pedro Bay ports, which include the Port of Los Angeles and the Port of Long Beach, is 193,000 jobs. So this includes direct employment and also indirect and induced employment. So in other words, the jobs created by the spending of the ports and their employees in Los Angeles and Long Beach. Now, the combined throughput makes the San Pedro Bay ports the 10th largest in the world by cargo volume. The Los Angeles basin's an important hub for international trade and transportation, and the port complex is definitely a key component of that. Now, in the Los Angeles basin, the port-related industries directly employ slightly over 100,000 workers. As we can see in the regional breakdown, the vast majority of this employment lies in Los Angeles County. When breaking employment down by sub-industry, we can see that scheduled air transportation and freight transportation arrangement employ the largest number of workers in the Los Angeles basin. Now, if we're looking at the characteristics of the current workforce in the port industries, the key point to remember here is that the average age of employees is quite high. Over half the workforce is above the age of 45, and less than 6% is under 24. Over the next decade and beyond, a mounting rate of retirements could lead to an even higher degree of job openings and an undersupply of qualified workers to fill them in the LA basin. Right now, over 30% of the workforce holds a community college level education. This means that there are many job opportunities in the port-related industries available to community college graduates, which is one of the reasons we chose to focus on this sector. 58% of all jobs in these industries, the port-related industries, are classified as middle skill and make great targets for the region's community college grads. In terms of employment growth, the port-related industries showed very strong growth in the decade leading up to 2019. Overall, 35,000 new workers were added across these three industries between 2009 and 2019, expanding the workforce by 50%. Comparatively, the overall workforce of the Los Angeles basin grew by just 16% in that period. So the sector is well impacing our overall employment growth. Air transportation was one of the catalysts for this surge. It nearly doubled in employment over the 10-year period as consumer demand for air travel increased. Now, occupations in these industries are solid opportunities for potential entrants to the workforce because average wages are fairly strong. The average annual wage in the port-related industries was nearly $85,000 in 2019. The air transportation sector is clearly raising this figure a bit, but the average wages in all three of these industries is higher than the average wage across all industries in the Los Angeles basin. And real wages grew by 23% over the past decade. So now that we have a bit of background on the port-related industries, let's talk a bit about the current trends and what we're expecting in the future, which Aveen actually did go over a little bit. So the first most important trend that we're seeing is the integration of technology into all aspects of the sector, which has great potential to drive efficiency and growth in the future, but could also have an impact on the workforce. So as companies are expected to deliver faster than ever and with greater transparency, technology is helping them stay competitive and cutting edge. This has come in the form of artificial intelligence and predictive maintenance on cargo ships to help mechanics anticipate issues before they happen and reduce the time spent on repairs. It includes the transition away from paper documentation and towards electronic bills in the air cargo industry, which will speed up the processing of shipments. At the ports, it's led to more automated terminals and cranes where data-minded, optimized operations can process shipments more efficiently and with less error. Internationally, some of the largest ports in the world have already integrated high degrees of automation into their workflow. So advanced technology is expected to augment the daily routines of workers in many ways and allow them to work more effectively. It has the ability to improve the working environment for port-related occupations and create a more diverse talent pool with more varied levels of skill in the workforce. However, there's some cause for concern here, as over time, automation has the potential to displace many of the labor-intensive operations that were historically performed by human workers. With increased investment into technology, robots could become more cost-effective in certain occupations. Another key trend in the sector is sustainability, as environmental concerns become even more pressing. So in the maritime sector, the International Maritime Organization introduced legislation just last year aiming at reducing carbon emissions by 40% in the next decade and 70% by 2050. Aveen also mentioned earlier the efforts to reduce emissions by 2030 at the Port of Los Angeles. Major airlines are adopting initiatives to operate net zero carbon flights and reduce or eliminate single-use plastics over time. It's likely that the pressure from both consumers and governments for being environmentally focused will continue to increase, and carriers will have to adapt themselves to allow for sustainable development and the introduction of green technology. Finally, there's some important trends at the workforce level. We already touched on the aging workforce in the port-related industries. With a potentially heightened level of job openings over the next few decades and the further introduction of technology into the work environment, the port workers of tomorrow will likely need to possess a different skill set than the ones before them, one that's more focused on working alongside technology and with data. So what about the impact of COVID-19? The pandemic affected trade flows heavily at the start of 2020. And though there was a large rebound in the later months of the year, it's going to continue to have an impact in the years to come. We could see trends of protectionism and shortened supply chains as a result, and an increase in reshoring or nearshoring from US companies. A focus on growth and recovery in the short term could also sideline efforts for sustainable development. COVID-19 clearly impacted the growth trajectory of the port-related industries in the LA basin, as we're going to see in the next slide. But I will note that forecasting in uncertain times does become extremely difficult, and changing circumstances could quickly affect the sector in unforeseen ways. So in our forecast, we expect the port-related industries to add over 12,000 new jobs between 2019 and 2024 when taking the pandemic into account. When compared to the expansion of the previous decade, where over 35,000 workers were added, the cool down of growth is pretty apparent. There's still going to be many opportunities available, however. Many occupations in the port-related industries have high rates of replacement due to workers transitioning between occupations, retiring, and more. So we estimate that there's still going to be nearly 65,000 total openings in these industries through 2024 in the LA basin. So where are these jobs going to be located? Here we can see the top 5 occupations by new jobs added. They include flight attendants at number 1, which again highlights how the air transportation industry is going to continue to expand. They have cargo and freight agents, airline pilots and co-pilots, ticket agents and travel clerks, and aircraft mechanics and service technicians. So of those 65,000 job openings during this period, we're estimating that nearly 60% are going to be middle skill occupations, making them perfect targets for community college grads with the appropriate training. In this report, we highlighted 11 occupations in the port-related transportation industries. 3 of them, the top 3, are classified as vulnerable entry-level port-related occupations. While spending time in these occupations can be a great way to gain work experience for a career ladder aimed at upward mobility, modernization of the ports may decrease future demand. So we're highlighting that these 3 for their vulnerability to displacement over time and the need to upskill to more automation-proof occupations. The other 8 are a blend of middle school occupations that have a strong future outlook and pathway occupations which open the door for future opportunities in transportation and warehousing. Community college grads should be able to target these as entry-level positions which provide the experience and the training necessary to work their way up to even higher skill opportunities in the future. And right here, we can see the projected employment growth in these occupations through 2024, with the total occupational employment as of 2019 below. So we see that the 2 largest occupations by total employment are in our vulnerable entry-level category and projected for just modest growth. Meanwhile, we have several strong middle skill target occupations with growth in the double digits, including cargo and freight agents, transportation inspectors, and aircraft mechanics and service technicians. In order to be qualified for these opportunities, what skills is the port workforce going to need? From our analysis of job postings data from employers in the port-related industries in the LA basin, we have a few key skill clusters here. These aren't going to apply for every occupation. In our extender report, we actually cover the specialized skills that employers are looking for in all 11 of the highlight occupations, along with the top industries that those workers are hired in. So this slide kind of represents the overall trends of what port-related employers are looking for. Customer service and sales is always important. As so much of the consumer experience has shifted online, employers are placing a high emphasis on remaining in contact with their customers and continuing to provide service. Of course, logistics and supply chain knowledge are always a critical focus, and employers are looking for workers that have experience with project management as well. As the ports of the future will be more digitally connected, having a familiarity with information systems, technology, and data analytics is another key for graduates. So those that have the ability to work alongside technology and utilize it to maximize their job will be in high demand. So that is our overview of the demand side of our report. And for more insight on the supply side, I'm going to turn it over to Luke Meyer right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Arthur. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. And as I'm doing so, I just wanted to welcome everyone. Let's see. There we go. Oops, let me go back. Welcome, everybody. I'm the director for the LAOC Center of Excellence for Labor Market Research. We're hosted at Mount San Antonio College. And for those of you joining us from outside of the community college world, we provide labor market information to the community colleges, primarily for investing in new and revising older programs, pursuing grants. And one thing that we do is assess the supply and demand. So the demand in the labor market compared to the supply, the number of completions at community colleges. We do this to ensure that when our students complete programs, that they are opportunities in the labor market that are in growing areas and also provide a living wage. So without any further ado, I'll get right into it. Move this over. All right, so the occupations that Arthur mentioned are here on the left, starting with shipping, receiving, and traffic clerks, electricians, all the way down. And in red, you can see the number of annual openings projected for each of these occupations. In blue, we have the average number of awards issued by regional community colleges, which is averaged over the last 3 years. And as you can see, out of all of these, the demand outweighs the supply quite significantly, with the exception of avionics technicians there at the bottom. The one occupation we don't include here happens to have the most opening due to a lot of job churn is the laborers, because there are no official educational requirements for that occupation. So as you can see from this, there are ample opportunities to expand some of these programs without fear of oversaturating the labor market. And related to these occupations, we have the following training programs. I understand there's a lot here. We have 15 on the right, and we have the number of awards issued from each program. Together, all these programs issue on average about 1,600 awards across all 15. To put this in perspective, the 19 community colleges in LA and 9 and 1 adult school in Orange County have issued awards related to 225 different CTE programs in the basin. So these 20 account for 9% of those. And across all 225 of those, there's just under 45,000 awards issued annually. So these 1,600, they only account for about 4% of all CTE awards. So we are just talking about the tip of the iceberg here. There are a lot of other programs offered by the community colleges that train students for these occupations. But the primary ones are listed here, from some of the international business and trade programs all the way down to some of the aviation programs mentioned. The numbers in parentheses is just the respective rank for those. So at the top, international business and trade with 21, that means that there were 20 programs, CTE programs, that issued more awards than that over the last 3 years. And now we'll talk a little bit about student employment outcomes from these programs. So how are students currently doing that are completing these programs in the region? And so this first metric is whether or not students obtained a job that's closely related to their field of study. This is self-report data that comes from our Career Technical Education Outcome Survey that's administered by Santa Rosa Junior College up north. And basically, after a year of students leaving a program, they receive a survey and are asked a series of questions. And one of them is the job you're working in now closely related to what you studied at your college? And as you can see here, we have 8 of the programs either meeting or exceeding the average across all programs in the region, which is 71%. So just about 3 out of 4 students report working in their field of study across all programs. You can see aeronautical and aviation technology. Every student that leaves that program reports working using basically the knowledge that they learn from the programs in their job. The next metric is median annual earnings. And so this comes from a wage to the unemployment insurance wage file. We take our students' information and match it to theirs. And they take their earnings in the second quarter and annualize that by multiplying it by 4. And across all LA Basin's CTE programs, the average is just over $33,000 per year. And you can see a couple of the programs at the top: heavy equipment operation, industrial systems technology and maintenance. Students leaving those programs are earning very high wages and doing very well for themselves. So almost all of the programs here meet the average. And just for reference, the cost of living for one single person in LA County is just over $15 per hour currently, which is about $31,000, assuming full-time employment. Now, that is raising by about $2 per hour up to $17 per hour, or just over $35,000. So that speaks to the importance about aiming our students towards careers that will pay them a living wage so they can support themselves and then in turn their families. The next metric is the median change in earnings for these students. So what this metric does is it takes before students started their program, what were they making, and compares it to what they're making after their program. And as you can see, the students leaving heavy equipment operation programs in the region are more than doubling their income at 124% increase. And again, most of the programs that we list here, students are exceeding the average across all programs, which is just about 29%. And then our next metric is the percentage of students that are earning a living wage. Across all programs, just about half of them are earning a living wage in the region. I think that's a number that can aim to be increased, but as you can see across these programs, the vast majority of them, students are attaining a living wage and doing well for themselves. All of that data that I shared is from our launch board, which is a system that compiles all employment metrics, enrollment, completion metrics across all programs for the community colleges all throughout the state. And so related to taking the demand for these occupations into account and the supply data that I just shared with you, some recommendations that have come out of this report that are specific to the community colleges are to focus on retraining and upskilling displaced workers from the pandemic. So a lot of people have lost their jobs, whether they're working at restaurants or in entertainment or barbering, other occupations that require a lot of close contact with others that have lost their jobs. We can focus on the community college at new or modified, especially short-term certificate programs. Those will be key. Students that have lost their jobs, they're probably not interested in enrolling in a long 2-year or more program. They want to get a job now. So the more that we can tailor our programs to help them get a job and get it quickly is going to be key moving forward. And then also to train students for jobs of the future. As Arthur mentioned, the rise of automation, digitization, and with the goal to reduce emissions and make things more environmental friendly, students that have those skills are going to have an advantage, especially related to identifying efficiencies. So all businesses want to be as efficient as possible. If our students have the skills to find efficiencies and identify those, they will have an advantage in the labor market. So these things can be incorporated into new programs, can start new programs, or they can be incorporated into existing programs. And then also for our students, we can raise awareness about these secure employment opportunities. So without getting the message out there to them, how are they to know that the community colleges are offering training to help get them a job? So somehow, some way, we need to communicate those to these students and say, quickly, you can earn this certificate or this degree, and you can be qualified for these jobs earning wages above the living wage. So these are 3 specific recommendations for the community colleges. And with that, I will turn it over to Stephen Chung to pick up where I left off there.
Thank you so much, Luke, and thank you so much, Arthur, for the presentation on the information about this report. Fascinating information. I actually took a lot of notes and changed some of what I was going to say. What I'm going to do is I'm going to step back a little bit. As Aveen was mentioning, with the port-related jobs that are there, we're looking at this report more than just port-related jobs, because it spreads to not just the seaport, but the airport. But really, to Aveen's point, it also connects to the goods movement aspect. But when you take a step back, when it comes to global commerce, there's so many more connected components to this as well. So I wanted to step back a little bit and talk a bit more about the region, the state, and really the rest of the world. The Port of Los Angeles, Port of Long Beach, LAX, and even beyond with Port of Hueneme, Ontario, all these airports and ports, their operation are completely dependent on international trade and global commerce. If you look at the operators that are bringing the goods from around the world into Los Angeles, they come from all over the world. Hapag-Lloyd, Costco, CMA, CGM, Maersk, Hyundai Merchant Marine, coming from Taiwan, from Korea, from the Netherlands. And so our international community is really located right here and is affecting the job opportunities that are here in Los Angeles and beyond this entire region. And that's why, as we're looking at the jobs that are described with this report, there's a multiplier effect, because what we need to do is continue to attract these international firms to come to Los Angeles, to open up their operation, their base here, so that we can have these great jobs that are hopefully beyond the living wage, and really to have family sustaining wage, so that we can help our workers be able to enter the workforce in a way that can be sustainable. I want to highlight another thing is that LAEDC with Arthur's team and Shannon Sedgwick, our director for the Institute for Applied Economics, have recently released two separate reports. One is the LAEDC Economic Forecast. The other one is a partnership with the LA County Workforce Development, Aging, Community Service Department. It's a Pathways for Economic Resiliency report that looked at the impact of COVID-19 on this entire region. And what we found is that there are over 716,000 jobs that were lost in the first few months of the pandemic. And over the last, the remainder of the year, some of the jobs returned, but over 400,000 jobs have not returned to the Los Angeles County region, which means that you have over 400,000 individuals that are displaced, and they're going to need upskilling and retraining. And that's why it's so important for this partnership between the Center for Competitive Workforce, LAEDC, the Center of Excellence, and all the community colleges around here to unite together to really look for the solution of how do we educate, how do we train, how do we upskill our workforce, not only the ones that are entering the workforce, but the ones that are displaced. And this report identifies some growth patterns that we can look at. And what we need to do is ensure that we have the talent pool and the talent system that can really attract these international companies. Because when the international companies are coming in, they're not looking just at the infrastructure. It's fantastic that the Port of Los Angeles and Port of Long Beach combined together is the 10th largest, busiest port complex in the world. And LAX in 2019 became the 3rd busiest airport in the world. But the reason why they chose this destination is not just infrastructure, it's because of our population as well. As many of you already know, there are about 10.2 million residents or consumers in Los Angeles County alone. In the greater Los Angeles region of the 5-county area, we have 18.7 million people. And of course, in the Southern California region, you have anywhere from 22 to 24 million people living in this region. That's another great reason why these international companies are coming into Los Angeles as their marketplace. But once they're here, they also want to access the rest of the state, the rest of the nation as well. And because of our transportation system, not only the seaports and the airport, but also our rail infrastructure and trucking infrastructure and the warehouse and distribution center that are located all throughout Southern California, including the Inland Empire, this really makes this region very, very attractive. But in order for that to work, we really need the talent system and the talent to be able to continue to sustain the growth of these markets. And that's why community colleges and the work that CCW is doing is pivotal to the recovery as we're looking at this. As Luke and Arthur both mentioned, there's some challenges up ahead in front of us. And what we're seeing is the changes in technology and sustainability that is required from these industries can potentially become challenges, but we also see that as opportunities. I'll be remiss when we look at these challenges not to look back a little bit. And an interesting story a lot of people don't know is that the Port of Los Angeles has always been at the center of innovation and change. If you recall back about over 100 years ago now, in 1907, there's a product that was actually created out of the Port of Los Angeles. It's called Chicken of the Seas. It's canned tuna. At first, it actually was called Hog of the Seas, but it didn't sell as nicely. So eventually it got rebranded as Chicken of the Seas. And at that point, what happened was they were trying to basically can sardines, but they were running out of sardines. So they decided to change the product and turn it into canned tuna. And it became a sensation. And with that, it became a huge industry. Over time, we overfished, and now we don't have the tuna that's here to be able to sustain that. So what happened is they continue to evolve, and look at the Port of Los Angeles and Port of Long Beach right now, becoming the 10th busiest port complex in the world through containers, through liquid bulk and dry bulk product as well. So as we're moving forward in the next phase, we're seeing technology is going to be driving that change. The important thing is basically understanding where the industry demands are and basically what the reality in terms of how do we place our workforce, how do we make sure that they're able to sustain, that they're able to be placed into these positions. And as again, Luke and Arthur mentioned earlier, it's important for us to basically work very closely with the community partners, whether they're labor unions, whether they're employers, whether they're industry association, to really come up with a strategy that can help our worker upskill and then eventually be able to enter the workforce. I want to highlight another aspect as I was talking about this in terms of the attraction. What we've seen in the LAEDC reports that I mentioned before is that a lot of these industries that are hardest hit are in accommodation, food services, personal care. So a lot of these industries not going to come back overnight because some of the small businesses are hit and some of the workers are the most vulnerable population. So it's not going to be easy for them to just basically jump right back when the demand's not there. And that's why it's pivotal for us to all look at how do we attract additional companies to come in, and international becomes a very, very attractive source of new companies that are coming in, and more working together with the World Trade Center. As Mike was mentioning earlier, there are a lot of international companies that are looking at Los Angeles as their base, but without that workforce, without that talent pool, we're not going to be able to attract them. So that's why I'm delighted to see this report, and I'm so glad that this partnership between the Center for Competitive Workforce with our community college systems, with all the partners that are involved, including the Port of Los Angeles, Port of Long Beach, LAX, and a number of different partners, are all focused on the recovery and the transformation of Los Angeles as we're looking into our next phase. So I want to just basically do one last plug, which is we really need to work together with the community colleges to ensure that this regional approach is still going to be front and center, because when these international companies are coming in, they're looking towards the talent pool, they're looking towards the community colleges, they're looking to the Center for Competitive Workforce to basically guide them to understand basically what the opportunities are for them and where the talent's coming from, so that they can develop their entire system as well. Looking forward to working a lot more closely with all of you in the future. At this point, I know there are a lot of questions that have come up in the chat. I'm going to pass it back to Claire.
Thank you so much, Stephen, for providing that international perspective as well. There are obviously a lot of different angles to look at this report through. So we really appreciate to all of our presenters for all of the data and the recommendations. I'm looking at the chat feature, so we do have a little bit of time for Q&A. If you have questions, I would encourage you to use the chat box to submit those. We have quite a few that have come in already, but I'm happy to say that they're all pretty similar. Folks are just wondering, what are we doing? How are we activating this information? How are we providing resources to students? You know, what does this look like in particular around the programs, but then also opportunities for internships, work-based learning, and things like that. So I'm happy to bring to the stage, the virtual stage, Jessica Koo Kim, who's our Vice President of Economic and Workforce Development, because we are doing a lot in this area. So it's a great opportunity to share some of that. And then if you have any further questions, please do use the chat feature. If we don't get to your question today, we're happy to respond via email as well. But with that, I'll pass it off to Jessica to address some of those questions.
Thank you, Claire. No, we're running up on time. So I will address George, our friend Michael, and David's questions collectively. Absolutely. I think a big part of the partnership and making sure that we serve this workforce is working across the systems. And so in particular in trade and logistics and for our port, the LA County Workforce Development, Aging and Community Services has been convening a group of employers over the past year to really understand the workforce needs and work collaboratively and regionally to address it. So reaching out to our partners at the community colleges and doing this as a regional approach to ensure that all of our Angelinos, our youth, our dislocated workers, individuals with barriers to employment have access and that opportunity. In colleges like East LA College, where they have a co-located America's Job Center, are all partnering in very tangible ways to do that. I will always say there's always room for improvement and there's always room to strengthen it and remove the barriers to accessing the opportunities like gaining work experience while you are going through educational programs. And so while they are at the community colleges and going through their certificate programs, they do partner with their local AJCCs to find employment opportunities, but the colleges themselves integrate work experience oftentimes as a part of the actual pathway. And so they are proactively engaging employers. We convened a group for regional program advisory to specifically look at trade and logistics. And so that effort is underway, but any partners who are interested, the Center for Competitive Workforce and Ruth, who will come up next, can definitely connect with you and support you to do that. And lastly, in terms of engaging our university partners, absolutely so. We did actually complete a recent report looking at the 4-year degrees, which can be found on our LAEDC website. But absolutely, we do need to look at holistic participation, and we do have partnerships with them. So we're happy to even look the non-community college, so at a high school diploma all the way through a master's degree, the ability to support our low skill into middle skill occupations and support those with middle skill talent into high skill occupations is all a part of the workforce ecosystem that we have to invest in. And just to quickly answer the PowerPoints, the charts and the reports, they will be posted on our website at the Center for Competitive Workforce, and we'll definitely show that at the end of today's presentation. So I'll turn it back over to you, Claire.
Thank you, Jessica. And I am in the process of putting that link into the chat box for folks that are asking about that. It is my pleasure to pass it to Ruth. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Claire. I'm so excited to be here. This is one of the reports I've been anticipating the whole year. So thank you so much. A little bit of introductions for those that don't know me. I'm Ruth. I'm the Regional Director for Employer Engagement for the Global Trade Sector for the LA region's 19 community colleges. I'm hosted at Long Beach City College, but I serve all the 19 wonderful colleges in our city. So basically what regional directors do quickly is just we work with our colleges in the designated region to strengthen connections between career education and business and industry. So essentially we're a liaison between a thriving sector like international trade, which is highlighted today, and our colleges. And so the biggest benefits that we have is for employers and industry, we kind of serve as a single point of communication to our colleges. And for our colleges, we also ensure that we're constantly providing resources so that our curriculum is on par and that we're also sharing work-based learning opportunities and obviously jobs for our students. So we don't have all the answers as regional directors, but we usually know somebody that does. So I would like to thank everybody here at LAEDC and CCW, and a special shout out to the World Trade Center, Mike and Stephen, who have continually been a resource and a source of connections for us. Again, a lot of things that have been mentioned here today is really we're all in it to make sure our students are prepared for the workforce and that they essentially are into career paths that provide living wage and that are sustainable. And this is such a great thriving sector right here in our backyard that we want to make sure that all students in many different programs enter. And one of the common challenges is really the awareness. We really need to demystify the sector. One of the things that I've found in this role is that a lot of students or even educators and counselors don't really think that there's entry points at the middle skill level, at the community college level. When they think international business, they think 4-year and above. So we really try to break down this the industry and say that actually there's a lot of demand at the middle skill level, and these are one of them. So we're one of the things that we do as a regional directors is raise that awareness. And really, I just want to leave you all just with a couple of resources that we're building at the regional level that help raise that awareness. Again, our motto is you can't be what you can't see. So we're really doing a lot of digital assets that help build a lot of awareness. We'll notice in the report there's such an interconnection between transportation, logistics, global trade. So we created a cross-sector collaborative we coined Proven Ready, and we have the website here, provenready.org, that raise awareness among multiple sectors, right? So that we're not remaining in silos. So this year, thanks to in part to a strong Works Career Pathways funding, we've been able to build a lot of digital assets. So a lot of videos, career spotlights. We're doing a speaker series to really show occupations and different companies that are located here regionally to students so that they get excited about the sector. And we also have our Global Trade Workforce Sector website that also highlights a lot of resources for students that they can tap into, a lot of also for faculty. So if you're an educator, both in the high school or in the community college space, we really encourage you to connect with us so that you continually are receiving resources for your students. So I know we don't have a lot of time, but I just wanted to be here and to thank again LAEDC CCW team for this wonderful report that will leverage for many for the year to come.
Thank you, Ruth. We really appreciate it and all the work that you do. It's so critical in your sector. With that, I will pass it back to Richard for our very final closing remarks. And you'll see on here the link where we'll be posting the slides and the video recording from today shortly. The full report will be available for download at that same link on Monday, but you can already see there some of the highlights. You'll also see my email address on the screen. So if you have any further questions, you want to get involved, please feel free to reach out to me and I'll make sure we connect you with the right person. So with that, I'll pass it back to Richard.
Thank you, Claire, and thank you, Ruth, and Katie Mishler as well, another of our regional directors for employer engagement in the transportation and logistics area. Been great partners with us, as have the other regional directors. But thank you for your questions. As you see, our reports are intended to be a common regional playbook for use to students, to faculty, to employers, to our education, our government, our philanthropic, and our community-based organization partners equally, to highlight opportunities as we assess our economic landscape, as we look at the highest growth industries from an economic development perspective, but especially for economic opportunities for deserving students, for emerging talent. And our partnership with LAEDC is critical to ensuring that we are all aligned in the region to support economic growth and to ensure economic prosperity. And as you've heard today from our speakers, who I want to thank again, these are complex industries, from the environmental regulations to legislation to our public health crises, to economic considerations, to the demand for talent, to the ability, or to government priorities, to politics and industry trends, and even new technologies. We are trying to all understand how we could prepare students, how we can ensure that they have the resources and opportunities to be competitive for these opportunities. And there should be no wrong door. Please reach out to any of us. Please refer students to any of us. I saw there was even a question about healthcare. We've not only done a report, but we also are deeply engaged in the healthcare industry and with employers and on a number of levels. So we want to support you and we want to support your students in every way we can. If we can't directly support them, we can connect them to those opportunities. But that is our mission, to connect students to opportunities and to ensure economic prosperity reaches all segments of our population and community. So thank you, Claire. Thank you to our partners at LAEDC, the Institute for Applied Economics, and the Center of Excellence for another outstanding report. It will be posted on Tuesday, but the slides from today are already posted at the website for you to use, for you to share, and the full report will be available, as will the recording from today at our website at CompetitiveWorkforce.LA. So thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you at our next report release in the spring. Thank you, Claire. Great job.